This is the Long Island Retro Gaming Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6. Can't believe there's been 6 of these already, of the Long Island Retro Gaming Podcast. Joining me today is Brendan Bailey, who has probably been on about a third of these now. So he's a frequent welcome guest, and he is going to walk us and me through an introduction to pinball. I've always known that pinball has been around, and everywhere when I was a kid, and everyone knows what pinball is. But if you would have asked me even as of a couple years ago if pinball was a huge thing, I probably would have said I don't think so. And boy, would I have been wrong. Pinball is a gigantic hobby. It's its own beast. I don't know a lot about it, and that's why I asked you on, Brendan, to teach. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. So let's get right in. So pinball's been around for a lot longer than video games. We know that the first commercially released arcade game was Computer Space around 71, 72. Do you know when the first, around when the first pinball machine?
So it's debated as to what counted as the first pinball machine. But a lot of historians kind of agree that there was before pinball, there was a game called Bagatelle, which was the best way I can describe it is almost like a slanted billiards table. And what players would do is they would hit the ball with a cue stick, and the ball would roll up and then come down and hit a bunch of pegs and land in
like pool, like billiards.
Yeah, like a billiards ball. So before pinball, there was Bagatelle, and you would actually hit the ball with a cue stick, and the ball would hit off of different pegs and land in like a trough, like a scoring trough, and whoever got the most points won. I don't really know if there was much strategy to it or it was just pure chance.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Wow, that's wild looking.
Yep. So that's the origin of pinball, and what happened was an inventor, his name was Montague Redgrave. He took Bagatelle and he came out with his own version of it called the Parlor Bagatelle table. And the big difference between his Bagatelle table and the traditional Bagatelle table was that there was actually a spring-loaded shooter connected to the table. So instead of using a cue stick, you would load the ball up into the shooting mechanism, pull the string back and release it, and that would launch the ball to the top of the table. And then same thing, you would just sort of watch the ball hit off of different pegs. And believe it or not, the reason it's called pinball is because the little pegs that the ball would hit were usually brass pins. So that it was just pins and balls. So they called it pinball, and that really is why it's called pinball. But people kind of consider that as soon as they invented the shooting spring mechanism, that's sort of the line in the sand where, okay, now we're dealing with, pinball machines instead of just like a variant of Bagatelle or a pool table or something like that.
It looks kind of like something you'd see in a game show where somebody puts something in the top and it goes bub, 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 and maybe you want to get it in like the $100 slot.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it was. It really wasn't until, believe it or not, pinball all the way up until 1947. So I think the Montague Redgrave machine came out in the 1870s, and all the way from then until 1947, all pinball machines were just that. You'd shoot the ball to the top of the table and just let it trickle down, and you could nudge the machine a little bit and hope it went into the point slot that you wanted. But that was it. All of the strategy had to do with how far you pulled back the shooter spring. I mean, that's really the only control you had over the game. And in 1947 is when the flipper was first invented and used on a machine. The first pinball machine with the flipper was called Humpty Dumpty. It was designed by Gottlieb, the pinball manufacturer Gottlieb, which is one of the biggest manufacturers of pinball machines. And the interesting thing about Humpty Dumpty is that it had 6 flippers,
Whoa.
not 2. It had 6, and they were what we would now describe as backwards. So the flippers actually went like that. They flipped inward instead of upward. If you look up the Humpty Dumpty machine, you'll see what I mean. They had 6 flippers going up the left and right sides of the machine. It's pretty crazy.
It sounds it. We're gonna put pictures in the YouTube video. So I guess right now we're dealing with pre and post 1947 about the bagatelle, and then was like starting in the 1800s. Were these very popular? Were they kind of like a small thing?
The pinball really hit its stride, believe it or not, in the Great Depression. Because if you wanted to play pinball, you could play a pinball machine for a penny, right? It was a penny for 10 balls. So people that were out of work or at the bar, you'd see a lot of tabletop-based pinball machines. One of the most famous being a machine called Baffleball, which is the first Gottlieb pinball machine. And that game came out in 1931, and it was a huge hit. I think I read that Gottlieb sold about 50,000 of these machines. So it instantaneously made Gottlieb a very rich man and a very rich company to sell that many units in the midst of the Great Depression.
Right.
He was doing really well. So, and because of his success, you had all these other companies that said, hey, this guy just built the Baffleball is a pretty simple looking machine. So a lot of other copycat companies came in and said, we can make a game. We could replicate this success. We can compete with this. And that's when a fella by the name of, I think his name is Ray Maloney, he designed a game called Ballyhoo. And it was, very similar. It was similar to Baffleball, same concept. It was a lot prettier looking. There's actually artwork on the playfield. Baffleball is just a very plain-looking green wooden cabinet, very simple-looking game. Ballyhoo actually had some very interesting artwork on the playing field, so it kind of set it apart. Anyway, Ballyhoo went on to be also a huge hit, and that established the pinball machine company Bally. They named the whole company after that machine. Okay. And not to go too far on a tangent, but yes, the Bally logo, that Bally logo, Bally Total Fitness and Bally Resorts, it has a long, crazy history of mergers and spin-offs and deals and all sorts of things, but it all came from that pinball machine, Ballyhoo. That's where the Bally name actually came from.
That's really neat.
It's you could go down the whole rabbit hole of just the history of Bally and the brand Bally, and that's where it starts.
I'm assuming that these machines, what's left of them, go for a lot of money.
You'd think so, but no.
Really?
That's the most one of the most common misconceptions about pinball is that the antique machines are worth a lot. There are some valuable ones, but the machines that Williams and Bally manufactured in the 1990s are the most valuable pinball machines. So it's some of the more recent games. But some of the tabletop antique games, if they're in stellar condition and you find the right buyer, they can be worth some money. I've owned a couple of them, usually not paying that much for them, sold them for a few $100s, but I have seen them worth in the 4-figure ranges, but like I said, they are not nearly as valuable as some of the newer games.
I would love to get one of those for the history exhibit we have in the expo. That would be really cool.
Yep, they are attainable. Like I said, I've had a couple of them pass through my hands. They get very boring. They're very cool. They're great conversation pieces. If you can find an old, they call them pre-war pinball machines,
right.
Basically, pre-World War II pinball games. And most of them are usually tabletop based. Some of them do have legs, depending on the cabinet style, but some of them are really intricate. They have some cool features and things like that. But like I said, there's no flippers. you're just shooting the ball and hoping that it lands, and they're definitely cool things, and they're cool conversation pieces. But in terms of just being able to play it over and over
Right.
again, I mean you get it real
It's a
quick.
little lacking.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about that in the future. So, all right. So we're at 1947. Gottlieb puts flippers in this thing in Humpty Dumpty, and then all of a sudden it's literally a whole new ball game.
Yep. Yeah. Basically, every pinball machine pre Humpty Dumpty, pre Flipper was basically instantaneously obsolete. Nobody wanted to play them. They stopped making money. Everybody wanted to play the Flipper games, and all of a sudden, you start seeing the phrase "a game of skill" written on the games. You'll see a lot of old pinball machines with the phrase "a game of skill." And there's a couple reasons for that. A, it was an advertising thing, to show that you could get good at pinball, you could practice, you can compete, you can play 2 players, 4 players, depending on what the machine allowed you to play. But the other thing was, the pinball had a big gambling problem, and that's that certain manufacturers were making pinball machines that paid out, that actually paid money, and they were chance-based machines. And so you started seeing 2 phrases. You started seeing a game of skill, and you started seeing the phrase "for amusement only," which you actually see on even games
Yeah,
today. You see
I've
the
seen
phrase
that.
"for amusement only," and everybody laughs. It's like, why does it say "for amusement only"? And because there were gambling machines. The opposite would be for
Right.
gambling. And pinball had a serious problem on their hands, where you had some pinball machines were for amusement only and some were for gambling, and they didn't make it very clear, which to the as far as the government was concerned, they couldn't tell the difference. They all looked the same, right? They weren't actually looking at the machines and reading all the words that were printed on them, right? And believe it or not, pinball was outlawed in a lot of places, including New York City, for all the way until 1974. So there were no pinball machines in the city of New York until 1974, because of gambling, because of the stigma of gambling-based pinball
When did
machines.
that started in
And
the 50s?
I don't know exactly when it started, but there's a very famous picture of Mayor LaGuardia in New York City destroying pinball machines. If you look up this, if you type in Mayor
I see it
LaGuardia and
right
you
here.
just
It
search,
took
yeah,
literally a second to find.
yeah, there's a very famous photo, and he's just they're just destroying them.
Look at this.
They just took a sledgehammer and him destroying games. It was him cracking down on gambling. He was like, that was one of his champion things, and that photo was a publicity photo to show him, throwing a pinball machine to the ground. And they outlawed pinball in New York City.
Uh, it
Um,
was in 1942, so for a very, very long time.
okay,
And
so before the game of
right,
skill flipper games
and
that came
I
out.
have a quote from him here. Mary LaGuardia was quoted before the ban saying he believed the machines robbed the pockets of school children in the form of nickels and dimes given them as lunch money. Lunch money. Given his
There
statement,
you
it came
go.
as no shock when a pinball machine ban was carried out in dramatic fashion in New York. So yeah,
Yep,
um,
yep. And to tie an end on that story, not to get too far off the timeline, but that in 1974, a guy named Roger Sharp, who is still very involved in the pinball industry, and his sons are also involved in the pinball industry. He played the greatest game of pinball, or the most important game of pinball ever, and he actually testified in front of a grand jury. There was a movement to get pinball legalized in New York and repeal the ban, and Roger had written a book about pinball and was called in as a key witness. This is a true story. This actually happened, and they brought a pinball machine into the courtroom, and Roger had to play pinball in front of the jury. And he said out loud, he said, "I'm gonna." I don't know exactly what thing he aimed for, but he said something similar to, I'm gonna pull the shooter, and I'm gonna get the ball to land in the third lane." And he pulled the shooter, and he got the ball to land in the
So
third
he was
lane.
demonstrating that it was a game of skill and not chance.
Exactly. Yeah.
Uh,
And he played the most important game of pinball, and they repealed the
that's
ban.
amazing. The second paragraph in this picture of in 1942, it says that in 1942, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia started executing a massive prohibition-style raid across the city by issuing an ultimatum to the NYPD that their top priority would be to round up all of the pinball machines in the city and arrest their owners. The raid resulted in thousands of machines being confiscated, then smashed with sledgehammers by the mayor and the NYPD before being dramatically dumped into the city's rivers. But pinball in New York City did not disappear. It simply moved to low-key locations in sketchy areas.
There you go.
Wild.
There you go.
Absolutely wild.
Yep. So I mean, it was it was stigmatized for a long time.
So between so we're having our big milestones in the history here. So we got our flippers in 47, and we got our ban lifted in at least in NYC in 72. Did anything else of note happen between 47 and 74?
So that's what we refer to as the electromechanical era, right? The word electromechanical is a major distinguishing point for a certain type of pinball machine. Electromechanical machines rely on relays and motors, stepper units, rotary scoring, all sorts of little electromechanical gadgets inside the machines. There are no circuit boards. There's no, the solid state computing equipment hadn't been invented yet and hadn't been brought to pinball yet. So that whole era is kind of called the electromechanical era, or shortened to EM. So if you read about pinball and you see the word electromechanical or EM, they're referring to basically the 40s through the 70s, where there was the games were electric. They had electric components. They had kickers and bells and all sorts of rotary units to keep track of the score and the game features, but no actual computer technology. And during that time, the games were pretty straightforward in terms of what kind of features there were. You'd see like gimmicky features, and you'd see things get introduced here and there, like the spinner, or the pop bumper, a bumper that would kick the ball away, or little gimmicks. Occasionally there'd be like a little ramp or something, or just little things. One of the most famous electromechanical games is a game called Fireball. And Fireball is unique because it has a spinning disc on the playfield that just spins at a really fast speed, and if the ball lands on it, it kind of gets pushed in a weird direction. So there was a lot of little gimmicky things and small little advancements. Like for a while, the flippers were only 2 inches long, but then I think in the late 60s or early 70s, they made the flippers 3 inches long, and they made the flippers a little stronger. But there really wasn't like a quantum leap forward until the late 70s, where they started putting actual computer circuit boards in the machines, and that became known as the solid state electronic era, which technically we're still in, because the games still are using computers to power and control everything.
Well, are those EM machines? It was EM, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Are those EM machines more sought after because they're older? Are they a bigger pain in the ass?
No, they are. They are. I don't want to say the least desirable, but they are definitely the least popular right now. I mean, there are plenty of people that are into EMs. It's hard to say. There's so many different types of personalities in this hobby. You do have a lot of older generations that are invested in the hobby, and the one nice thing I'll say about EM machines is that you can get them pretty cheap. So if you want a pinball machine to tinker around with or restore, EMs are a good direction to go. But you need to have a lot of patience and a lot of knowledge on how to fix them. They are, they really are truly mechanical devices. So you are at the mercy of making sure that every electrical contact and every stepper motor and every score reel and thing has to be working right for the machine to operate properly. There's no updating the software or changing out a circuit board to fix problems. You have to just get in there and get your hands dirty and fix, whatever thing is causing the machine not to work. You have to like track it down and find it and clean everything that's inside the machine. So they are they are a different type of thing. They're a different beast to work on when it comes to repairs. And but the nice thing is, you can get them a lot cheaper because they're not as much in demand. There's also tons of them. They made thousands and thousands and thousands of different machines.
That was one of my next questions. Was in between that 47
yeah.
and to the end of the EM era, how many machines were there? I'm assuming that it was wildly popular.
Yeah, I think the total number of machines all time is between 4,000 and 5,000 different titles.
Whoa.
But production runs on games is an interesting thing to look at. Back in those days, they weren't making like crazy huge production runs, but it wouldn't be uncommon to see a game, of 3,000 units sold or 5,000 units sold, or if it was a big hit game, close to 10,000 units sold. I'm not 100% sure on what the record for an EM machine is. The all-time record for a production run is actually the Addams Family machine from 1992. They made, I think, 21 or 22,000 of those, and that is still to this day the record-selling pinball machine. But if you think about it, there's between four and 5,000 different titles, and roughly, unless the game was a complete dud, they made usually around 1,000 of them. So there's a lot of pinball machines.
Yeah.
They made a lot, you're finding these things in people's basements and barns, and who knows? And Mayo LaGuardia tried to destroy a lot of them, but he didn't destroy all of them.
Right.
They've survived.
I know that repair is a it's up to you. I have two. I don't know which topic to go into. I have collecting and repairing, which maybe kind of gets tied in together, but
yeah.
Yeah.
You can't. Let me put it this way. You can try to collect pinball machines and not repair them, but you can't.
Happen.
You have to. If you want to own one machine, maybe get like a new machine and pony up and pay what the new machines are selling for.
Which are like what? What would they go for?
So a new machine today, if you bought one brand new in the box, the base models roughly are around $6,000.
Hachi machi.
Yeah. So I can go on pretty much a rant about the prices of pinball machines in today's market. When I got into the hobby, I started getting into it with my dad back in 2001. And back then, you could literally walk out your front door and like trip on a pinball machine. They were everywhere. You could buy them super cheap. It was amazing. You can get any game you want. They were on eBay. Even Craigslist, early forms of eBay and Craigslist, where you could get any game you wanted. There were certain games that even back then were pricier than others, but compared to today, everything was a bargain. If you had $500 in your pocket, you could get like a really nice machine, fully working, almost any game you want. It was great. You could find deals like crazy. And I did. My dad and I, we bought, we were buying and selling games, and Today, things have picked up and the hobby is more popular than it's ever been. And to my surprise, is that people are buying new machines in large numbers, despite the fact that the new machines are really expensive. Even back in 2001, I mean, a brand new machine was 3 grand, and now here we are, and the base model of the new machines is 6 grand. So I mean, it's doubled, and that's just for the base models. Now they sell the games in tiers. You can get the base model, you can get the premium model, or the limited edition model, and some of those limited edition models are in the 5 figures to buy the game,
Jeez.
and people buy it. People buy them. That they sell, and people are always anticipating the next machine. And like I said, if you wanted to buy one game and you had like a repair guy that you could call to come fix it if something goes wrong, you could probably get away with that. But as soon as you start having multiple games, um, you have to learn. You have to learn
Right.
how to do the basics. I mean, you know,
How
I mean, these things require upkeep. There's no way around it. Stuff breaks, things get dirty. I mean, you gotta stay on top of them.
how was there any like golden age after say 1980? Because the reason I ask that is when I go to a convention, say like MagFest, and I look at all the pinball machines, and it could just be me not really paying attention, but I feel like a lot of the really cool machines are kind of from around the same, look to be from around kind of the same time period. So I'm wondering if there was kind of like a little boom, like maybe in like the early 90s or something.
Yeah, there's the phrase golden age is so interesting for pinball because everybody has their own definition of the golden age. A lot of people consider the golden age of pinball to be the 70s. Simply because you had, Tommy, the rock opera Tommy, and the musical and all that stuff, and that really brought pinball into like this huge mainstream, like cultural awareness of pinball that was really big. Um, and believe it or not, in the in the early '80s was actually a really bad time for pinball. Um, Pinball was struggling to keep up with video games. Video games offered some serious competition in the arcades for pinball, and with the video game crash, that really affected pinball as well. And around like 1983 and '84, you can look at a lot of pinball machines, and you could see that they were stripping things out of the games to save whatever they can. And believe it or not, Williams actually almost went out of business in the early '80s, but they were saved by a game called Space Shuttle, which was a huge hit game, and they sold a ton of them. And that game saved the. Many people say that it saved the industry. In my opinion, Space Shuttle kicked off what I consider the golden age of pinball, which is the mid to late '80s. This is a time when designers, artists, musicians were being brought in to make what I consider to be the greatest pinball machines ever made, simply because of a pure creativity standpoint. Um, Before that time, pinball was basically a playfield designer would design a layout and they'd get the game to work. And then their part was done. They would hand it off to an artist. The artist would draw some pretty artwork on the playfield, paint a beautiful backglass, and the artist would pretty much just come up with the theme, and that was it. They would test the game. They'd write some basic software and ship the game out. But it was around the time that games like Space Shuttle came out, and specifically a game called High Speed. High Speed is considered another watershed game for pinball because High Speed is the first pinball machine that tells a story, right? In the game High Speed, you are driving a Lamborghini and you've run a red light and you get away from the police. That's the story of the game. And this was a level of creativity that was not like present in pinball before. So all of a sudden you had the artist and the sound designer and the playfield designer all working together to make a complete package. right? So you've got the music and the voices of the police officers talking, and the artwork is all highways, and there's a tachometer on the play field, and there's a police beacon on the top of the machine that spins when the cops are chasing you. And there's hideaways that you get the ball into to get away from the cops. Like this was a level of intricacy from a creative standpoint that was not part of pinball before that. Sure, there were beautiful machines, beautiful backglasses, interesting themes, fantasy themes, and all sorts of things. But from a storytelling standpoint, that hadn't been done before. And from that point on, almost all the games had that. They had that level of storytelling or characters that were introduced. And that's still going on today. So that's my definition of the golden age of pinball, is because in the late 80s, all the creativity was just bursting. Every game introduced something new, some new toy or some really cool gimmick or some cool theme that hadn't been done. And then you have the people that consider the early 90s to be the golden age of pinball, because you had the games like the Addams Family that sold the record amount of machines ever, and games were coming out, being built better and firing on all cylinders with deeper modes of play, and the software of the games got really complex, where you could play a game for a full half hour if you had a really good game and not see everything that the game had to offer. So the games were getting more complex. So depending on who you ask, you'll probably get one of those three answers. But there might be people that would argue that today is the golden age of pinball,
Right.
because it's more popular than it's ever been, and people are actually shelling out $8,000 for a pinball machine. It's like, oh my God, I mean, that in a way is like, it's like a golden age from a hobby standpoint. So as far as what the golden age for pinball is, it's highly debatable. It's highly subjective, but it's any one of those, I think,
Well,
would
I mean,
work.
I think any hobby is a pretty good hobby if almost every decade can be a golden age of the hobby. Not
Yeah,
bad.
yeah. I would say one decade that wasn't the golden age was the 2000s. I mean, pinball was on death's door in the 2000s. There was only one pinball manufacturer still in business, which was Stern
Hmm.
Pinball, who are still in business. Williams and Bally had exited the market in 1999, and everybody thought, no, every game that came out, people were speculating, this is Stern's last game. If Stern doesn't sell enough of these games, it's done. Nobody's buying games. Pinball isn't making money. I mean, that decade, that was a bad decade for pinball. It started turning it around towards the end of the decade, but between 2000 and I'd say 2005, 2006, that first half of the decade was very bad, and everybody thought that pinball was done, and people were giving the games away. Like I said, you can get games cheaply. People didn't want them. I mean, people were giving them away. I mean, I've gotten machines for free. I mean, people have given me machines because they just didn't want them in their house.
So,
I mean, it was that
so
bad.
what
But
changed it? What made it turn around, or what helped it turn around?
I can't say for sure. I think it's just very similar to what we see with retro gaming. People are discovering things from the past, and pinball has a lot to offer. People who are a fan of retro games. I mean, what do what do what do things what are things that people like about video games? They like the artwork. They like the stories. They like the gameplay. They like the creativity, the sounds, and the music. There's a lot of things about retro gaming that are 80s inspired, and there's a lot of the 80s had a lot of influence on pinball. And so I think there's a lot of crossover between people that like people like gamers that are into retro games. They discover pinball and say, there's a lot in the pinball world that I like about other things. And pinball machines are not, at least from like the 80s onward, are not shallow devices, right? There's a lot of thought put into each game. They're not just, the goal isn't to just keep the ball alive, right? It's to accomplish something in the rules of the game. It's to get the multi-ball or get the jackpot or complete the cycle of the story. It's more than just getting the high score or keeping the ball going for as long as you can. And I think people just discovered it or rediscovered it and started appreciating it on the level that I think it should be appreciated, because you look at some of the artwork on the games, you listen to the sounds and music and voices of some of the games, and you realize that the designers of pinball machines were putting just as much effort into those games as the designers of early video games,
Right.
And video games of today. I mean, it's the same sort of, I think, appreciation for the creativity of it.
One thing that I've always liked about pinball machines in my limited experience is just how exciting they sound. Like you walk up to a pinball machine, you pop in a quarter, and just like the sounds, and it's just there's such an energy to them. There's so much action, and I mean I know it varies by machine, but like just right from the get go, like they inject you with this kind of excitement, like whoa, like what's gonna happen, or this triumph, the music playing in the beginning, and you shoot the ball off, maybe a voice comes out, and it's really cool stuff. And I've never really put a lot of thought into like looking at the differences, like looking really under the hood about the mechanics of the different games, just also because I haven't really played a lot of pinball myself. But I know that next time I go to a machine, I'm going to be kind of looking at it from the student of Brendan Bailey aspect, and just kind of see it from a design perspective.
Yeah, I mean, in this interesting age of Facebook and Twitter and everything, I mean, what's cool is you can get in touch with these guys, the designers and artists and composers and programmers. A lot of them are, for the guys that worked on the machines in the 80s and 90s, like they're on Facebook. I've spoken to a bunch of them. I've met a bunch of them in person. I've picked their brain, and it was, they all agree it was an exciting time for them too, to like be a part of this, like this interesting window of opportunity where they were making games with this new level of creativity, and one of the things I'm most interested in is sound design. And you listen to a pinball machine, and I mean it has a full soundtrack. I mean there's music. I mean there's the choreographed music. There's different themes for each stage of play where you are. If you've got the multi-ball going, the music picks up and that kind of thing. And but these aren't just like short little loops. I mean, these are full-blown soundtracks. If you're a fan of video game soundtracks, you'll probably be a fan of pinball soundtracks. I mean, they sound, especially the early ones, sound very similar. I mean, it's all, FM synth-bass chiptune music, but like really good.
Yep, I'm into that.
The pinball's got that, and that's another parallel between that and the retro game rebirth, and I think pinball kind of caught on to that.
I mean, we had pinball machines at the expo for the first time this year, and I mean, you saw it. It was to say it was a hit would be an understatement. I mean, people went bananas.
Yeah, you couldn't get on a game. I mean, it's hard to walk up. I mean, there are certain machines, most machines, I would say, that you walk up to and you can't say that they're not cool. I mean, they're just cool things. I mean, they are. I think it was George Gomez. George Gomez is a famous pinball designer, and I think it was he that said that, like, he came from a toy design background. And he got so inspired by the idea of working on pinball machines because he just considered them to be just the biggest, most impressive, like industrial-sized toy that you could possibly build. And that's a good way to put it. I mean, that's what they are. I mean, they really are just like these industrial toys, and there's way more to them than the average, quick ticket game that you'll play at like Dave and Buster's or something. There's a level of depth that's put into them. There's a level of story, and there's a level of programming that makes the game worth playing again and again, so you can see all the things that you didn't see on the first few games while you were learning the game and figuring it out.
And to differentiate it from a lot of other pinball machines, because some people might say, "Oh, a pinball machine's a pinball machine," but I mean that is very incorrect.
Yeah, well, that goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that it's not about just keeping the ball alive, right? Like, yeah, you got to keep the ball alive, but like, what are you doing with it? Like, I mean, you can learn flipper skills. I mean, you can learn to control the ball. You can learn to catch the ball and cradle the ball and bounce the ball off of the side to get it onto the other flipper, so you can make a shot that's on the other opposite side of the playfield and that kind of thing. You really can get better at pinball. It's not a random game. You can learn how to nudge the machine so that you won't tilt it, but you can influence the direction of the ball enough so that you're controlling the game a lot more. There's a reason why someone who's played a lot of pinball can get up to a machine and play for a long time, and someone that's never played pinball will lose really fast.
That's me.
Yeah. So that's another thing that people have to get over with pinball, is like some people do think it's still a game of chance, or that there's too much chance, or it's just there to try to take your money. It's really not. I mean, it is a game of skill. I mean, you can get good at pinball.
Well, I know that there is a huge competitive scene with pinball, and I know that you're not really like a huge competitive guy, but I do want to get somebody on the podcast at some point to talk about competitive pinball, because I know it's big. Ryan, who's part of our expo team, I know he plays in a league, I believe, and I want to learn more about it, because it seems like a really wild thing.
Yeah, it's the real thing. I mean, competitive pinball is a thing. I mean, there's actual money to be won at some of these tournaments, and I like you said, I haven't played in a tournament. I've just never been. I don't know. I've never found myself wanting to, but I've been to plenty of events where there are tournaments being held, and the interesting thing about what they do is they structure it in a way where anybody can play. Right? You're not necessarily going to go up against the best players there. They have different divisions and tiers and ranks where they are. A good pinball tournament is structured where anybody can walk up. If you're a beginner, there's different tiers that you can join, and how they do the point system, and
so they make it accessible.
You're accessible. You're playing against people of your skill level and that kind of thing.
What about here's a question for you. What is the deal? It's like a Jerry Seinfeld thing. What is the deal with virtual pinball?
Virtual pinball is great. I am a huge fan of virtual pinball. Some of the pinball purists out there, it's like, oh, it's not like the real thing, and like, obviously it's not like the real thing. Nothing replaces real physical pinball. Right. But virtual pinball is a good way for people to get access to pinball. I mean, you can play the real machines with running the real software virtually now. Whether you're playing on Pinball Arcade or Zen Pinball or whatever is out there right now. I mean, those apps, they are running the real code. They're running the real ROMs from the machine. So I mean, if you play the Addams Family, you are hearing the real sounds that came out of the machine. You're seeing the exact same light shows that were on the real machine. You're seeing the same animations on the display. I mean, it's an emulation of it. I mean, they're using the real software. So what that has done is it's allowed people to kind of sort of pseudo test run the game, right, to see if they like the theme, or if they like the way it sounds or plays, or what the game is all about, and most importantly, to learn the rules of the game, because every pinball game is different. And so you play these apps and you can kind of learn, okay, now I know Now, if I ever see this machine in real life, I can step up to it, and I know I have to hit those three targets and then shoot that left ramp to get the multi-ball. You learn the rule set of the game by playing the virtual versions of the game. Um, and then there's also, of course, the original virtual pinball stuff, not based in reality, but like kind of like the fantasy pinball
Right.
games. And like I've actually designed my own games on the computer. There's different software for designing your own game. You have Visual Pinball and Future
Wow, that's really
Pinball,
neat.
and these are apps that you can create your own machine on. You can also download machines that other people have made. And then obviously you've got the the real machine, the versions of the real machines on those platforms that you can play. And the last thing about virtual pinball is the people that are building cabinets with TV
Well,
screens in them, like
that was one of my
actual
questions.
yeah, yeah. So you have people that are building actual physical cabinets, not just people, but also companies that manufacture these things that you can just buy, and they come. It looks like a pinball machine. It's the same shape as a pinball machine, but instead of a playfield, you just have a giant flat screen monitor in it,
With just two
and
buttons on the side
you
for the
can.
flippers and
Yeah, and those machines are basically just computers. There's usually just a
it's like
PC-based rig
a
inside it,
main box.
and yeah, and you can play Visual Pinball, Future Pinball, Zen Pinball, Pinball Arcade, whatever, all those different apps, as long as it runs on the cabinet PC, you just play them. And that's a cool way. I mean, if you don't have a lot of space, that's a cool way to experience pinball. I'm a big fan of Virtual Pinball. I grew up playing video game based pinball for the NES and Super Nintendo and Genesis and computer and all that stuff, and it's cool to see that virtual pinball is alive. But obviously, it doesn't replace the real
Right.
thing. If you get your hands on the real thing, that's what you want. But it's a cool other avenue in its own way, and I'm a big fan.
Is when they, let's just say you download or get a hold on of some original tables for virtual pinball. So I guess they like dumped the software that was in the thing, and then somebody made the artwork, like the graphics for the game.
Yeah, they've basically recreated it.
That-
They've recreated the game. I mean, they take the software, they scan the playfield artwork or the plastic artwork or the backglass, and they just recreate the games. So you're seeing the real art. You're seeing everything.
Damn
I
it,
mean,
Brendan! Now I'm gonna start getting into this.
yeah. I mean, it's scary. I mean, it's endless. I mean, there between all of the real games that have been emulated and all of the original games that have been created,
Forget about it.
there's an endless like you have an endless amount of I mean, that's the thing. I think I don't own one of those virtual pinball cabinets, but you could get a serious amount of entertainment out of one of
Yeah.
those. I mean, there is just endless amounts of tables that you could download and play. And like I said, you could learn. I think it's a great way to learn how to play different games. I mean, there's so many games out there. You can't possibly hope to play each game for real long enough to learn all the different rule sets for the game. So the virtual angle is a good way to learn how to play the games.
Yeah, I guess if you're playing in a tournament and you really want to be good, what better way to practice if you don't have the original
And
machine?
it helps. It helps as long as you know how to how to get the big points on that game. You learn the rule set, and like I said, some of those games from the 90s and the newer games, they're very complex software packages. There's a lot to know about what the game can do. I mean, I owned the Addams Family machine for many years, and still towards the end of when I had it, I was still noticing little things like, oh man, I didn't even know it. I didn't know it did that. I didn't know you could score, get an extra bonus by doing that. And it was crazy. The little secrets that are hidden in each game's like software.
That's cool.
So
So any community of anything these days, I misspoke that. Anything that's popular these days has a community. Obviously, pinball has a pretty big community. What is the pinball community like? I know it's somewhat large. How are the people? Are they cool?
yeah, I mean, so the biggest website is Pinside. Pinside.com is like I'd say is like the hub of like the community. And like any community, I mean, you have your trolls and then you have your people that are super helpful, right? I mean, pinball is a community where you're dealing with very, very technical issues on electronics from, the 70s. And there will be that guy that will take the time to help you, or walk you through some sort of test that you can do to figure out, what's going on with your game. And yeah, I mean, the community's great in that way. There's a lot of good wikis set up for pinball repair that have, basically been community funded, if you will. And on the other side, of course, you have a lot of people that are trying to cash in the pinball hobby right now. People are paying a lot of money for games, and you have people that are just trying to get a hold of games and then resell them to make a quick buck, right? And I feel like that's true in any hobby. I mean, any hobby where you're dealing with tangible goods, that any sort of collector market, there's going to be people that flip stuff. It's confusing because you hear the term flipper, right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, he's a flipper, he flips games, and also you're dealing with flippers, actual flippers in pinball.
Double
so
pun.
Confusing.
Well, I mean, we've definitely never seen that in the retro gaming scene. So
yeah, I know, it's true. I just if someone's getting into pinball, just be careful if you're going to pay top dollar for a machine. You just want to make sure that it's refurbished properly, that everything's working, that you're not going to have any problems. The problems are always going to crop up, but if someone advertises a machine that it has been gone through, there's a lot of things to know about. Has it really been gone through? Has it been refurbished properly? Any sort of bulletproofing or things, there's a lot of things that could go wrong. There's a lot of things that you can know up front about a machine, to educate yourself so that you don't get taken advantage of by anyone. But on the flip side, there's lots of honest sellers, and there's a lot of people that are doing amazing restorations, right? Like incredible, jaw-dropping. Every square inch of every piece of metal has been polished, and the whole cabinet's been re-stenciled, and the playfield's brand new, and it's clear-coated, and the ramps are new, and the plastics are new, and the posts are new, and the flippers are new, and the balls are new, and everything. It's you're seeing some just incredible work. And so you just have to educate yourself on as much as you can. Especially if you're buying your first machine or you're interested in learning.
Do we have a community here on the island, right?
We do. There's actually there's a lot of pinball guys on the island. I used to run the Long Island Arcade Club, out of my office. And unfortunately, we had to hire people, so we lost room for our games. We had to sell some of the games and put in desks for people to work at.
Much less fun.
Yeah. So, but for a time, I had a big chunk of my collection, actually in my office, and we had a cool space where we could hang out and play. Unfortunately, I had to bring my games back to my house, and. So we still, the friends that I made in that group, kind of most of which are, pinball guys, we still hang out on a regular basis. There's no real, as far as the community goes, there's no regular meetings or anything or a club. But, there is a Facebook group, the Long Island Pinball Owners Association. So that's a good place to look at if you're on the island and you're interested in just talking with people and possibly meeting people and seeing their collection. So occasionally someone will have a little get together and we'll all text each other or throw something up on Facebook and hang out.
Long Island we got a lot of good stuff here. We got a lot of, I think I mentioned this on a previous podcast, but the retro gaming talent here is top notch, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of complaints about Long Island, but one thing that I love about Long Island is that when you're from Long Island, you're kind of in that you're already like in that group, right?
Right.
It's like, hey, you like video games and you're from Long Island? Okay, well, we're in that
Yeah.
group together. It's like there's like something about just the geography of Long Island that like kind of
Because we're all
unites.
stuck.
Yeah,
If the
we're all
bridge falls
stuck
down, then we're
here.
all screwed. So
We're all stuck here. It's like, and it's weird. I mean, it's sad to say, but the best place to go play pinball on Long Island is like my friend Dave's basement. I mean, it's like there's no place, there's really no like pinball like
place to go.
emporium. There's no good place to go play pinball other than the people that you know. I mean, there's places in the city. You can drive out to the city, you'll be fine. There's some good places in New Jersey. There's no like good core place on Long Island to play pinball. You got to go to somebody's house. You got to put the machines in your own house. I mean, I've said it before. If there was one of the reasons I got into pinball collecting was because I couldn't go. I wanted to play pinball, and there's no place to play. If there was an arcade, within 20 minutes, 30 minutes that had 10, 15, 20 machines in it, I would just go there.
Right.
I wouldn't put them in my house. Maybe I'd have like one or two, not 20.
Or 3.
It's like I really do mean that. I mean, like I started really collecting machines out of just wanting to be able to play them regularly, and there's just no place to play
Right.
them. It stinks, and on Long Island, we've all had that conversation of like, hey, maybe we should open a barcade, or maybe we should open a pinball place, and it's like, I don't.
Well,
That just seems like a big risk,
it is.
the electric and the upkeep of the games. I mean, it's hard enough to keep the games in the house working right, and they're barely getting played at all. Imagine them getting played by people,
Being banged,
24/7.
banged around. And well,
Yep.
Long Island does need an arcade, so we'll leave
Yeah.
that topic for another show.
It,
So
it would be nice, but it's going to be a lot of work for somebody, that's for sure.
So if let's say Johnny Retro Gamer has never really been into pinball, and now he wants to learn about it, he wants to get into a little bit more, what would you advise Johnny do?
Definitely join Pinside. It's a good website. That's a great website, not just from like the forum standpoint, but also just their database of information about all of the games that are out there. They have pictures of every game. So you have people writing reviews of different games. They have a lot of interesting stuff. They have a marketplace, so you can see what people are selling, buying and selling parts. It's a great website. I mean, from a design standpoint, I work as a web designer professionally, and the Pinside website is like ridiculously impressive. Like just the amount of features and stuff they've put into that website. So definitely join Pinside. If you're on Facebook, there's a ton of pinball groups. I think the biggest one is just called Pinball Enthusiasts. Join that. There's some good videos on YouTube about getting into pinball and what to expect. I wish I could say it's cheaper. I wish I could say that it's a cheap hobby to get into, but it's not. But there are some ways to be a thrifty, pinball guy, and wait, be patient, and hunt for deals and that kind of thing. Buy games, try to buy games that are broken and learn to fix them. That sort of thing. Buy the older games if you really want to get your feet wet. Buy the EM machines. But as far as what's getting started, I would say my biggest piece of advice is to just educate yourself on the most costly things that can go wrong with a pinball machine. Circuitry getting destroyed by battery acid, or games that have worn out play fields and how that affects the value of the game. And if you're going to buy a game, just don't get taken advantage of. Try to make an educated decision when you go to buy your first game, because like I said, they're a lot of money, and there are people out there that are trying to sell you stuff for a value that maybe would be a fair price for a game that's refurbished properly. But if there's issues with the game, if there's parts that you're going to have to replace, or things that may go wrong within the first few months of having it, you just want to be prepared and make an educated purchasing decision.
So be wary, guys. If you're looking to buy a machine and you have some questions, as we said, there's communities everywhere. There's the pin side, and there are multiple Facebook groups, and I'm sure lots of other avenues as well. I'm sure that somebody would be willing to chime in and maybe give you some advice if you're a little unsure.
Hey, you can message me. I mean, you can find me on Facebook.
You can message Brendan.
There you go.
All right, dude. Well, this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. And the way this is going, maybe you'll be back on in 2 or 3 episodes.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you could do sub episodes on the pinball topic. I mean, you could go deep.
Oh, we are. Don't worry.
There's a lot. There's plenty to discuss.
Well, I can't thank you enough. And I'm gonna be.
Thank you for having me. As always, it's always fun.
Gonna be doing some editing here, but
yeah, there you go. Take out some of my nerdy rants.
No, those are great. All right, let me do a proper exit. Well, dude, I can't thank you enough for coming on. This was really enlightening for me, and I can't wait to learn more. And we'll catch you next time, guys. Take care.
Okay, take care.